Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you having here.
No, it's my pleasure to be here.
You really want an independent judiciary, but before we get into what that even means, what is your organization about? Why do you exist?
Sure. Our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, charitable organization that is dedicated really to promoting public awareness and understanding and promoting confidence as well in our state's courts. And we do that by going around and basically speaking at any kind of event that we can. We have literature on our website that folks can download, copies of the state constitution, information on how our courts work, what judges do, basically anything that people need to be able to understand how their courts work better so that they can play a more active role in helping us maintain that independent judiciary.
Well, I think that's interesting, the way you work that, because you're really putting a positive spin on this. And one of the code of ethics for an attorney or a judge is that they can't criticize the courts. You know, so you're putting a positive spin here, saying we want to have a positive spin on our courts. We want to maintain independence. And now, on my show, I tend to bash the judges. I'm not an attorney. They can't discipline me for that, but they can, in other ways, get me. But you're really trying to focus on the positive nature of what our judiciary should be, could be, and is.
Right. Our goal is to bring together as many diverse people as we can, from the far right, from the far left, everywhere in between, to get them involved in the courts. Because when you talk to your average Minnesotan and you talk about the courts to them, no matter what their politics, they want judges who are going to fairly apply the law as it was written and intended by the legislators who wrote it, or the Constitution. They don't want activist judges. And the best way in order to ensure that is to bring as many folks together as we can to promote what the court does and make sure that those judges are held accountable for doing what the court is supposed to do.
Well, and my experience has been just that. It is both sides of whether a person is liberal or conservative or in the middle. I'm finding most people are gathering around this whole idea of an independent judiciary and want to see that and want to have the rule of law followed, but the definition of independence means different things to different people. So what would, or impartial, what would you say would be an independent judiciary?
I would say our organization would say, based on the debates that we had at our state constitutional convention and our first Chief Justice, that an independent judiciary is one that answers to the people, not to special interests or partisan politicians at the Capitol. And that's a big difference from what other people think an independent judiciary is. Because since the time of our state's founding, there have been folks pushing to say they should have a judiciary that is independent from the people and serves the special interests instead. So that's quite opposite of what our founders wanted. It's quite opposite of what we've had for the past 150 years. And that's one of the reasons why we created this organization, to get out there and to promote our founders' vision of what an independent court is. Because they knew very well the lessons from history and about how important it was, if you were going to protect individual rights and liberties, to have a court that was strong enough to be able to stand up to people like the governor or legislators when they do something wrong, strong enough not to have to bow down before special interests or big business or anything else.
Yeah, well, when I'm down at the legislature, and of course this next week there will be hearings in the legislature on the judiciary, at least the judiciary will be making presentations, I have never seen a real thorough vetting of the judiciary. Why are you asking for X amount of dollars? Do you really need it? Is there some better way we can do this? What are your goals? There's really no deep, it's kind of like, tell us what you want, we'll get it for you. And so this whole aspect of separation of powers is there, yet the judiciary is coming asking for money because they can't apportion their own money. Yet the legislature really isn't performing any checks and balances on that end. So I guess my question in that regard, where do you see some of this checks and balances play in, or should it be more? Is it anywhere out there? What's going on with that?
When you look at it, when Minnesota was founded, back, in the 1850s. There, 1858 is when we became a state. We were in an era right before the Civil War. Things were so partisan that the folks that wrote the Constitution, the Republicans stayed in one room, Democrats in the other. They wouldn't even sign the same copy of the Constitution. So what they did is created a court system that they could take and make it as independent as they could, but they created the check to keep it independent. Mm-hmm. So they made very clear when they wrote their Constitution how the courts are going to be able to be independent, but also be checked, because a court that answers to no one is going to run away with itself, mm-hmm. and it's going to lose control. So they created a situation where the legislature is supposed to control the power of the purse over the courts. They're supposed to discipline and remove bad judges, and they have the ability to write rules. And our founders understood that this was something that they needed to do to check the courts. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, over the years, we've lost sight of the vision of the founders, and we've moved towards a system where the legislature will ostensibly tell you that, well, we don't want to get involved with the courts because they're an independent branch.
Right.
The reality is they just don't want to do the work.
Right.
Put in the time to do it.
Well, you raised so many questions there, but kind of the foundation, I think, in order to get started here is how are judges selected in Minnesota?
Right.
I mean, what is this process we go through? What is the process we go through to get our judge?
Since the beginning of the state, 150 years ago, the Constitution has required that all judges be elected by the people of the state. And today they serve 6-year terms. So whether they're a district court judge, an appellate court judge, or a Supreme Court judge, they all are supposed to be under the Constitution elected by the people. And that's a great system, and it ensures that the people are overlooking the judiciary instead of the politicians or special interests in terms of accountability factors. But even in the best of circumstances, you're going to have situations where vacancies are created.
Right.
And what the Constitution requires when there's a vacancy is for the governor to appoint someone to fill that vacancy following a process laid out by state lawmakers. And that person serves not as the actual judge, like when a United States senator were to die mm-hmm. or leave office, a person's appointed to fill that seat. But in Minnesota, under the Constitution, the person appointed by the governor is just a temporary placeholder. They don't fill the actual judicial seat. Instead, they just are there to make sure that justice isn't denied to anybody in the time it takes to have an election, which is required also under the Constitution to happen 1 year out at the next general election from the time that the vacancy occurred.
Well, it's an elaborate, but it's not too elaborate of a process. I mean, it's just a process that needs to be followed.
Right.
But what I see happening now is that very few judges are elected. Very few judges or attorneys will run against a sitting judge. And very few, most of the judges are appointed in some branches of our government. I think the appellate court, judges have only been appointed to that office, and then judges have run for re-election unopposed. But no judge has ever lost an election that's been appointed first in the appellate court.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting situation because you have these appointed judges that are temporary judges. They go on and they decide that they're going to run for the actual judgeship. Mm-hmm. And that's fine because the actual judgeship is open to anyone that is qualified or a lawyer to run for that judgeship themselves. And that serves as a check on the governor's power to help prevent him from appointing his brother-in-law or other people that aren't qualified. But the problem is, we've seen, in my personal opinion, the application of the word incumbent on these temporary judges, even though they don't actually hold the judicial seat. They've been labeled as the incumbent judge in that election.
Well, and the word incumbent means you've been elected.
Right.
But they haven't been elected.
That's right. So that has an impact, and it does impact when people decide to run or not, and that's a problem. The bigger problem in general is that we have so many vacancies being created. And
yes, a huge number of vacancies.
Right. And people there's various reasons. The legislature sets a mandatory retirement age, only on judges of age 70. So once you hit 70, they force you out of office.
Which is questionable whether they really can by American ADA law, Americans with Disability mm-hmm. Act, because that's age discrimination. But yet I mean, this is something I find out about the courts, is that laws that apply to the citizens and corporations, and you can't discriminate. In the judiciary, a lot of these things are off the table. You can discriminate based on age. You can discriminate based on disability and various things. Anyway, so
right.
some of the retirements at age 70.
Very, very legitimate. And sometimes you have judges that'll get sick, or there'll be
right.
developments that they have to step down. But a great many of them just decide that they want to retire. And that's something that, I can appreciate.
Sure.
That folks want to retire at a certain time. But can you imagine what would happen if United States senators, when they reached a certain retirement age, if they were just simply resign instead of serving out their term, or if all lawmakers were to engage in that kind of behavior, just resigning instead of serving out their term, your local mayor stepping down. The system doesn't work as it should. The founders did not create the system to have temporary judges appointed in all circumstances.
Right.
That there's a check by the popular election on that, but it's not the same as when you have an open election after a judge has served their term and decides not to run again. Mm-hmm. That opens it up to any qualified applicant so that the people can decide who's the most qualified person in our judicial district to have this office. We don't want the governor to choose for us. We don't want someone on the other side of the state to choose for us. We know who we respect. Mm-hmm. And who's respected by Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives.
Right.
And we lost that by moving to this kind of system where all these judges resign early.
Well, it's just so easy then with this resignation and appointment to not engage as an individual, to not engage our judiciary. I mean, we engage the executive branch, all eyes on the executive branch, all eyes on our legislature. But the judiciary, we're just kind of, I don't know anything about them, and I don't even know who my judges are. I don't want to see my judge anyway. I don't want to be in the courtroom, rightly so. And there's kind of a fear, why should I find out about my judge? I want to stay as far away as possible. Yet this is one of our third branches of government. It is, in Minnesota, an election, and it seems to me that the system now is designed to get people to not look at this and just to kind of have a wall of separation from the people from the judiciary.
Yeah, people don't pay attention, but they're not really given the opportunity to pay attention. I had a great opportunity in 2010 to be involved in a 24-candidate race in an open seat for judge in Washington County, in this local area here. A couple of more 8 counties altogether.
Yeah, this show goes into Washington County.
Yeah.
So
this was a really exciting race, and it was great to watch people interact with the different candidates. They were just excited to actually meet people who were going to run for judge.